Hey, we're going to talk about how to buy a house in Kentucky. So now let's say you're a first-time home buyer. This is going to help you a lot. Or if you're moving to Kentucky from out of state, this is going to help you. Now, it's not like everything's so much different here than other states, but this will show you what the procedure is here in Kentucky. And I think it's going to help. Now, we're going to go through the 7 most commonly asked questions from home buyers, and we're going to try to make this real clear so you know exactly how this works. Now, I'm on location here at Moonlight Fields Wedding Farm. I'm in Nicholasville, Kentucky, right in the heart of the Bluegrass, right outside of Lexington. And so I'm a top producing realtor in the state of Kentucky, and we're going to see if we can just make this real clear so you know exactly what to expect when you're buying a house in Kentucky. You know, one of the first questions I always get is, what is the best time to buy a house in Kentucky? Now, let me share with you a couple things. Number one, it's very, very tough to ever time the market. If you're trying to find out the exact best time to buy a house, and I'll address that in a moment. But also with interest rates. I mean, interest rates can go up and down. They're up right now. We don't know what they're going to be in 6 months or a year. Probably going to come down again, but we don't know that for sure. Now, having said that, let me say this to you. The housing prices in Kentucky are not going to fall. I mean, you know, the high-end property sometimes go up and down a little bit, but by and large, the inventory is low enough that house prices are not going to be, in Kentucky, not going to be lower next year than they are this year. That is not going to happen. Housing prices are staying pretty stable. And I know a lot of houses right now that I'm dealing with are still even going for above list price. So the bottom's not falling out, and it's not going to fall out, not in Kentucky. Now, that may happen in some larger cities. We don't know. But it's not going to happen in Kentucky, at least not in central Kentucky in the Bluegrass where I'm at. Now, having said that, the best time to buy a house really is based on 2 factors. I mean, it's not based on trying to time everything. It's based on, number one, are you in the financial position where you're ready to buy a house? That's number one. And number 2, it's when you find the property that you really love. Listen, you know, if you're in a great position to buy a house, but you can't find the property today that you're in love with, then you know what? It's not the right time. The right time is when it's right for you. That's when the time is. The best time to buy a house. Now, the next question I get all the time is, where do I start? I want to buy a house. I've never done this before. Where do I start? Well, the place you always start is with your pre-approval. You have to have a pre-approval from a lender to really legitimately be able to start the process. For instance, if you go to a lender and you get them to give you a pre-approval letter that lets you know how much they're willing to loan you for your house. Now, that does several things. Number one, it just very simply lets you know that you're in a position financially to be able to buy a house. Secondly, the most important, second thing it does for you is that it lets you know how much that lender will lend you towards a house. If the lender says, hey, we're going to loan you up to $400,000, it doesn't do you a lot of good to start looking at houses for $450,000 or $500,000. You kind of know where your budget is. Number 3, we need to provide a letter from a reputable lender, a pre-approval letter, when we go to make an offer. In Kentucky, it's not going to be considered a legitimate offer until you have proof of funding. Very important. And lastly, number 4, it allows you to move quickly. A lot of times people want to try to find the house they like and then go get a pre-approval. The problem with that is that if the house is a good deal and it's a nice house, by the time you come back with your pre-approval a couple of days later, house is probably going to be under contract already. So if you don't have a pre-approval from a lender, it just makes you makes you at a disadvantage because other people will be able to move a lot more quickly than you'll be able to move. So you get your pre-approval first. That's where you begin to look for a house. Now, the next thing people ask is, well, how do you go about actually looking for a house? Well, you can do that I can do that. We can work together to find you the perfect house for you. Now, one thing I would say is really determine what are your non-negotiables in looking for a house. You say, for instance, I have to be in Nicholasville or Lexington. That's a non-negotiable. Okay, that's good. But then you say, but I really would love to have like an acre of land. Okay, that's cool. We'll go for that. But you might find something you love that's maybe slightly smaller than an acre. So you don't want to limit your searches to houses that only have an acre and more, because you might eliminate something that may have really liked. So you got to determine what's a preference and what is a total non-negotiable. And I had a buyer one time say to me, Roger, I have to have a garage facing the side. I do not want a garage facing the front. I said, okay. So those are the kinds of houses I was looking for. Well, he found a house on his own that he loved where the garage was facing the front. I thought we didn't want a garage facing the front. He goes, yeah, but I really love this house. I said, okay. Couldn't find out that was the house he bought. So that was a preference more than a non-negotiable. So really make a distinction and do your search based on the non-negotiables, the things you have to have. Like maybe it's 3 bedrooms. You got to have 3 bedrooms or more. That's fine. But then don't eliminate some houses that may have something that you didn't think about, but may not have some other things that are kind of preferences, but you may find some stuff that the houses have that are more important to you than what your preferences were. Does that make sense? So anyway, cast a big net, look at a lot of properties. That's the key. You want to look at a lot of properties that fit into your non-negotiables. A lot of times people ask me, now what's a seller's disclosure? So well, I don't know what that is. Look, a seller's disclosure is an incredibly important document that you get when you begin to take a house seriously. Let's say we find a property that you just love. I mean, it's great. You know, you love the floor plan, love the location, you love the lot, you love it. Well, the next step is we've got to look over what's called the seller's disclosure. Now, this is about a 5-page document that the seller provides to us that lets us know everything the seller knows about the house. So it's going to go through the flooring, the roof, the foundation, the electrical, plumbing, all kinds of things to let us know if the seller knows that there's the problem with anything, or if he knows when something's been updated. We want to know that. Now, if the seller doesn't know, they can check unknown and we won't know. They don't have to disclose what they don't know, but if they know it, by law, they have to disclose it. And so we make our offer based on having read that disclosure. So it's an incredibly important document. We read that thing over. If we have questions, I'll ask questions for you to get some clarity if we need that. But we want to know what the seller knows before we make an offer on the property. Because technically, once you make an offer on the property and we sign that we've read the disclosure, we're not supposed to come back and ask for stuff to be fixed that's on that disclosure, because we're making an offer having read what's on the disclosure. Does that make sense? Now, when we find the house we like, we have to love it. We've read the disclosure. We think, okay, we want to make an offer on that house. What does it take to make an offer on the house? 4 things. 4 things we got to do to make a legitimate offer on a house. Number 1, we have to fill out a residential offer, a residential contract. It's the new contract we use in Central Kentucky that specifies our offer. It's going to tell the seller how much we're offering for the house. It's going to tell them what kind of loan we're getting. It's going to give a lot of information, make sure we're clear on what conveys with the house. It's going to have all kinds of stuff. It's an 11-page document. So we're going to have to fill that out. It's usually the first couple of pages, really all you have to fill out, and then sign the end of it. But we've got to fill this out, and that's one thing I'm going to give to the listing realtor. Now, second thing we need is we're going to have to sign off that we've read the disclosure. We've already talked about the seller's disclosure. We got to sign off that we have read that. Thirdly, we need to put down what is called earnest money. Now, typically it's about 1%. So let's say we found a house that we love, it's $300,000. We're going to write a $3,000 check that's going to be held in the escrow account of my broker. Now, when we close, you'll get that money back. All this is money that says we are serious about buying this house. Now, typically the default inspection period is 14 days. If we walk away for whatever reason within 14 days, then I can get you your escrow money back. if after the inspection period, after the due diligence period, we now call it, and let's say that's set to 14 days. So after 14 days, we decide, we just change our mind. We just don't want that house. Well, good chance we're going to lose the earnest money at that point then, after we've gone through the due diligence time. So, but we have to put an earnest check down. Then lastly, we've got to show proof of funding. So we do have to show, we've talked about this, the pre-approval letter from our lender. We've got to prove that we have the money to be able to buy this house. So those are 4 things that I give to the listing agent to make sure they know that we are a legitimate buyer here in Kentucky and we're making an offer on this house. Now, one thing that's a real biggie in real estate is what's called the appraisal gap. So let's say we make the offer, we go through the inspection, everything's looking good, and then the lender then has got to make an appraisal. They got to decide whether or not they're going to loan the money for the house. So let's say there again, it's a $300,000 house. Well, the lender has got to agree that, yeah, we're willing to lend you enough money to buy this $300,000 house. So you may have a down payment, whatever, but we're going to lend you the balance of it. Okay, so let's say you're putting $5,000 down, whatever. So they're going to loan you $295,000. Well, they've got to do their appraisal to make sure they believe that the house is worth that much. Now, sometimes what happens is if the offers go above list price, then let's say that the house lists for $300,000, but to get the house, we had to offer $320,000. Okay, so we're willing to pay $320,000 for this house. We love it. But the lender comes back and says, we only think the house is worth $310,000. So that's all the money you're going to get, $310,000. So we have a $10,000 appraisal gap. Okay, so we got a problem. We got to solve this. Now, one of 3 things can happen. Either we can cough up the extra $10,000 so that we're paying that, and the lender's still just loaning their $310,000 or whatever it is they're loaning, but up to that. Or we can get the seller to come down on their price. Sometimes the seller will say, okay, if it's only appraised for $310,000, we'll renegotiate this thing for $310,000. Sometimes that happens. Or what happens a lot of times is we renegotiate. So we say to the seller, look, house only appraised for $310,000. Would you consider splitting the difference, selling the house for $315,000? Now, there's a pretty good chance the seller will do that because at this period of time, several weeks have already gone by. They probably don't want to start all over and relist the house. And so most likely they're going to say, okay, let's renegotiate this thing. Let's do the deal for $315,000. So we write it up for $315,000. We pay the extra $5,000. They came down $5,000. The seller's happy, the buyer's happy, the lender's happy, and we're going to go to closing because we got a deal. A lot of times people ask me about the inspection. They say, now, how does the inspection work? Well, here's the thing about the inspection. The inspector works for the buyer. So when the inspector comes back with a report, we hire the inspector, and I'm not supposed to pick your inspector. I can give you some ideas, but you're going to pick your inspector. The inspector works for you, works for the buyer. So the report that he produces, and it's always a big report. I mean, I find all kinds of little stuff everywhere. I mean, that's just normal. That report belongs to you. And so he gives you this report, and based on that, we decide if we want to move forward with the purchase of this house. Now, if it's not something that affects the value of the house, normally you just have a list of stuff you might want to do at some point, but this is not a to-do list for the seller. Notice we can't say, okay, the inspector says that the socket, the outlet in the hallway is not grounded. We want you to ground that. It's not a matter of taking care of all the little stuff. It's a matter of trying to find out if there's anything substantial that affects the value of the house. Well, come to find out, hey, we do have a leak in the roof. You probably didn't know that. We got to solve that. And so that's when we say to the seller, look, can you fix the roof? If there's a problem with the plumbing, if there's a problem with the HVAC unit, if there's a problem with whatever, that's when we can go back to the seller. Now, a lot of times the seller will say, well, this is an as-is inspection, which means they're not obligated to fix anything, and they may not. But that means that we can walk away if we want to. Or a lot of times, even though they've said they're not going to fix anything, when it comes down to it, to save the deal, everything's negotiable. They still may absolutely fix it. So let's say we can actually look, the gutter in the back is leaking like crazy. And so they'll say, okay, we'll take care of that. So they get that fixed, show us that it's fixed by a licensed, insured roofer or whoever they hire to fix the gutter. So whatever it is, we resolve the major issues that the inspector finds. If he finds major issues, we solve those so that everybody's happy and we can move forward with this deal. Or we use that to say, nah, we're gonna have to get out of this deal. We just can't do this anymore. So inspection is incredibly important, but it's important to remember too that the inspector works for the buyer, and his report is the buyer's report. Even though it's on the seller's house, the report does not belong to the seller. It belongs to the buyer. You paid for it, it's yours. Now, people also ask me, now, Roger, what happens exactly at the closing? Well, normally at the closing, we go to the office of the attorney. Sometimes it's someplace else, but a lot of times at the closing, attorney's office or the land title company. And they have already done a title search on the property to make sure there's no liens against the property. It wasn't some contractor several years ago that didn't get paid for doing repair on the roof. Maybe he's got a lien on it or whatever. They check for all that kind of stuff to make sure you can get a free, unencumbered title to the house. So we go there, and you're going to bring your driver's license. That's the most important thing for you to do. They're going to verify your ID, and you're going to sign a bunch of documents, you know, the loan and just all kinds of deed, all kinds of things. And then I'm going to bring your escrow check that you put down. Remember that, your earnest money? Well, say you put your $3,000 earnest money down. Well, I'm going to bring that to the closing, and you're going to endorse that, and they're going to put that money towards the purchase of the house. So essentially, you're going to get that money back. The seller will be there. They're going to give you the keys to the house, all the remotes, any other information we want to know, we'll get from the seller at that point. And we've also done we've also done a final walkthrough right prior to that closing to make sure nothing's changed. You know, it hadn't been a fire, hadn't been a leak of some kind, nothing's gone crazy. And we'll usually do that either the night before or maybe even the same day as the closing. A final inspection right before we close to make sure this is the house is in exactly the same condition it was when we made an offer on it. And so then we go through the closing, we sign off on the final walkthrough, and then the house is yours. They turn over the keys to you, we've signed the documents, and when you leave that meeting, normally, now occasionally there's a post-occupancy thing, but normally the house is yours at that point, and you can begin to move in immediately. Congratulations. You just bought a house in Kentucky.